Sing a little Jai Radha Madhava for auspiciousness and inspiration, empowerment. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Jashodanandana Prajajanaranjana Jashodanandana Prajajanaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Mukam karoti vachalam bhangam langayate girim yapkipatamaham vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, wonderful, beautiful, amazing devotees. Thank you all so much for being here. It's wonderful to be with you today, the day after Gaur Purnima, or it may even be Gaur Purnima, well, yesterday, today in India. I know in different parts of the world it can be different, but it was Gaur Purnima here in New York yesterday, and we had a beautiful, beautiful 3-day festival. A Saturday evening we had our roots of Kirtan, and Johnny V. Harrison gave class, and Chutu Gopi sang Kirtan with their family, and so beautiful Abhishek, and Jai Gidid Hari was here, and he brought Gornitai from Alachua here to have Abhishek and be worshipped. And the next day Rasanath Prabhu gave a beautiful class on the sensitive heart of a devotee and the sensitive heart of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Gambhira Hridaya, at the Bhagavat Shravana. And then last night we had another beautiful, beautiful, beautiful celebration, about 100 devotees. Again, Jagir Hari was there with Gornitai. Her Grace Arundhati Devi came, one of Srila Prabhupada's very senior disciples, came and led Kirtan for us, and Jagannath Prabhu gave class. It was just really, really sweet, this great meditation. And then when I got home, it was late at night. Sometimes when I get home late at night, it's like hard for me to just go to sleep, and so I realized that His Holiness Ranat Swami was giving a class live at that time in Chowpatty, but he was in Chicago. But it was being streamed at this time, and so I turned into that class. And so it's just a beautiful absorption in many, many ways. And thank you for all of those who did that. Suzanne is asking, are we recording? I don't know, are we?
No, we ran out of space on Zoom, so we're just live streaming on YouTube, and that's our recording.
Does it record on YouTube?
Yeah, just that's YouTube, no Zoom recording.
Okay. So it will record on YouTube, which is all the only place that we post it anyways, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for looking out. Takes a village to run a community, looking out for each other. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the Bhagavatam, shall we? Sure, why not? We are here in Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto. It's a big canto, so we're going to be here for a little while. Chapter 20, 10th canto, chapter 20, entitled 10th canto, The Rainy Season and Autumn in Vrindavan. Beautiful. We were on this chapter last week and we talked about the light of the Bhagavat, Srila Prabhupada's book that he wrote, and eventually later his disciples got it illustrated by beautiful artists. Okay, so Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 20, verses 16 through 17. Let's go ahead and share the screen. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. Margababuva sandigdas trinaishchana hyasamskrita nabhyasamana shuttayo dvijayakalena chahataha. Translation. During the rainy season, the roads, not being cleansed, became covered with grass and debris, and were thus difficult to make out. These roads were like religious scriptures that Brahmins no longer study and that thus become corrupted and covered over with the passage of time. Let us read that again to catch it. During the rainy season, the roads, not being cleansed, become covered with grass and debris and were thus difficult to make out. So if you imagine the rainy season in India, which is a month or two of just continuous torrential rainfall, it makes it hard to even function and get from point A to point B because everything just floods. Cars can't drive on the road and people can't go out, and it's just tons of water pouring down. So the roads don't get cleansed. The roads don't get properly maintained, and they get neglected. And so they get covered over by grass and debris, and it's hard to really make out the road. Is there a road here? Where is this road going? And it just kind of gets covered over. So you can't really see and make out the roads. And Bhagavatam is comparing these roads that get covered over by time like the religious scriptures that Brahmins no longer study. So Krishna makes this point also in the Bhagavad Gita. Where does Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita talk about the forgetfulness or the forgetfulness of Vedic teachings, the losing track, the going off track, and the need to be remembered and brought on track? Where does Krishna mention that in the Bhagavad Gita? Anyone?
Sarvasya Chaham, Radhisani Vasto, 15:15.
Krishna does mention that in the 5th chapter. That's not where I was thinking of, but we can look at that real quick. Krishna mentions that he's the source of knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. I am seated in everyone. Sarvasya chaham hridisani vishto matasmritir jnanam apohanam cha vedaischa saver aham eva vidyo vedantakrit veda vid eva chaham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. Very, very beautiful verse. We can spend a lot of time talking on this verse, and from what I understand, this is one of the, if not the most oft quoted or referenced verse of Srila Prabhupada in his books and literatures. Very, very, very often quoted verse by Srila Prabhupada, 15:15. And so Krishna is the source of remembrance and forgetfulness. Thank you for that reference. There's another place in the Bhagavad Gita I was thinking of where Krishna specifically mentions about Vedic science being lost, forgotten, and the need for Krishna to come and remind us. Dun 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 dun. 4th chapter Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 2. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakaleneha mahata yoga nashta parantapa. The supreme science was thus received that the chain of disciplic successions, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in the course of time the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. So there's this idea that throughout time and throughout history and throughout our own lives, spiritual science gets forgotten. It gets lost. It gets covered over. That's true throughout history, and that's true throughout history of humanity at large, throughout the history of people, and it's also true throughout our own lives and throughout our own existence. Last night, Jagannath Prabhu was giving class on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he was talking about how extremely fortunate we are to be born in the time of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu just a few hundred years ago, and to have the opportunity. We take it for granted so much, the blessing of the association of devotees and the great gift that we've been given by Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas, and the opportunity that we have wherever we are to even just click a button and tune in and hear the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. Hear this beautiful message of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam itself mentions in the 3rd chapter, the 1st canto, the power of the Bhagavatam. And so this Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of God. And it is compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of God. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people, and it is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Vyasadeva delivered it to his son, Shukadeva Goswami, who is the most respected among the self-realized, after extracting the cream of all Vedic literatures and histories of the universe. So in bygone ages, people would have to just search for it, just pore over books and histories, and to discern the meaning of Vedic truth, the highest realization, where it all leads to. And our acharyas and Sri Vedavyasa himself did that and gave us Srimad Bhagavatam. And then it talks about how Shukadeva Goswami in turn, again, this is the received through the chain of disciplic succession. We're hearing it right here. Shukadeva Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, in his turn delivered the Bhagavatam to the great Emperor Parikshit, who sat surrounded by the sages on the banks of the Ganges awaiting death without taking food or drink. This Bhagavat Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who have lost their vision. There is our connection, Hare Krishna, to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali, shall get light from this Purana. So it's there in the Bhagavad Gita. This supreme science was received through the chain of disciplic succession. Right there, here's the disciplic succession. Srila Vyasadeva to Shukadeva Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj, all the way down to Srila Prabhupada, to us. But we lose our vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali. In the course of time, the succession was broken. And of course, here in Srimad Bhagavatam, these roads were like religious scriptures that Brahmins no longer study, and that thus become corrupted and covered over with the passage of time. Bhakti Hugo put here in the chat, reminded of how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had to actively search for years to find a proper copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Thankful for the reminder of how blessed we are to have open access to great depths of spiritual knowledge. Yeah, so true. So true. Thank you, Bhakti Hugo. So, last verse of this chapter of Bhagavatam. O learned Brahmins, when Shukadeva Goswami recited Bhagavatam there in the presence of Emperor Parikshit, I heard him with rapt attention, and thus by his mercy I learned the Bhagavatam from that great and powerful sage. Now I shall try to make you hear the very same thing as I have learned from it, and as I have realized it. There's a lot there, beautiful things that we can open up the purport and dive into, but we will not divert too much. All we have to do is be grateful for what we've been given. Gratitude is a practice. It's not. It's a natural condition of the soul, but it's not a natural condition of the ego. Gratitude is not a natural expression of the false ego. And we are trying to, because why is gratitude not a natural expression of the ego? Anybody want to speak to that? Why is a false ego not naturally compatible with the idea of gratitude? Anybody want to take a guess?
Because gratitude is the concept that something is coming from outside yourself, whereas the false ego thinks that it's providing everything itself.
Say that again. Who's this speaking? It sounds like
It's Venetia. Can you hear me?
Venetia. Thank you, Venetia.
Can you hear
Go
me
ahead.
better like this? I was on headphones.
Okay, that's better. Yeah, please, Venetia, go ahead.
I was saying maybe because the false ego has the idea that it's the false idea that it's providing everything itself, whereas gratitude is it requires the understanding that what's coming is coming from outside of yourself, that it's not being provided by the false ego that thinks it's, doing everything.
God, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. It's beautiful, and I could have said it. The false ego operates with this idea that it is providing everything, and that as opposed to things coming from outside myself. And there's a beautiful verse. I'm sure there's a lot of places in Shastra, but there's one particular verse that specifically talks about this idea of the false ego thinking itself the doer, from Bhagavad Gita. Is there a verse that anybody can think of from Bhagavad Gita or other places about the nature of the false ego being the doer, thinking that it's the creator, thinking that it's the doer, as opposed to recognizing that things are being done outside itself? I started to look it up, and then I was like, let's see if we can guess it. Bhagavad Gita verse about the false ego being the doer.
You're entitled to perform a prescribed duty, but you're not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. That one?
Where is that, in the second chapter?
I don't know.
You're entitled to the fruits of action. That is a verse. That is a verse that very much relates to this idea. It's not the verse I was thinking of, but it is a verse. Let's see. I believe it's in the second chapter. Let us see. Yep, here it is. 247. Karmanya e vikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala he turbur ma te sangostva karmani. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, so you can act, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action, because you ultimately are not the doer, maker, creator. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. So yes, never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities. So that does speak to this point that Venetia was making. Thank you for that. There's another, and like I said, there's many verses like this, I'm sure. There's another verse from Gita that I'm specifically thinking of. Anybody else, real quick? Start to look it up. Or any other verses or references of the ego thinking itself that it's the doer. I'm thinking of Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 verse 27. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimud atma kartaham iti manyate. Prakriti kriyamanani. Actually, things are being done by Prakriti, material nature. Gunai karmani sarvashaha. Ahankara vimudatma. The spirit soul bewildered, the Atma vimudha, under great foolish illusion, thinks themselves that they are the doer. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks themselves the doer of activities. that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature, exactly as Venetia said it. And Srila Prabhupada, very briefly in his purport, says, two persons, one in Krishna consciousness and the other material consciousness. One grateful, one ungrateful. One aware of Krishna's presence and blessing in their life, and one completely unaware, thinking that they're on their own. I, me, mine, I made it happen. Somebody once, I translated ahankar literally meaning I maker. I make it happen. So two people, one in Krishna consciousness, others in material consciousness, working on the same level. So they're doing the same things. They're performing the same activities. They're living life very similarly externally. May appear to be working on the same platform, but there is a wide gulf of difference in their respective positions. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that they are the doer of everything. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that they are the doer of everything. They do not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. The materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately they're under the control of Krishna. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of nescience. So beautifully put, Venetia. It's exactly what Prabhupada is saying here. So well said. I'm going to remember that. That person does not know that the gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature under the order of the Supreme Personality Godhead, and as such, their bodily and mental activities should be engaged in the service of Krishna and Krishna consciousness, giving back to what's been given to whom from I've been given so much. I don't know if that sentence made sense grammatically, but I hope you got the point. Giving back to that person from whom I've been given so much. The ignorant person forgets that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Rishikesh, or the master of the sense of the material body. For due to the long misuse of the senses and sense gratification, they're factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes them forgetful of the eternal relationship with Krishna. Again, this forgetfulness, this going off track, this losing. Here in the Bhagavatam, we read that we've lost our vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance. Chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, that the science as it is, the succession appears to be broken. Prabhupada mentioning, forgetting our eternal relationship with Krishna because of the influence of false ego. And we counteract that influence of false ego through the practice of gratitude, which means even when I don't feel grateful, I find a way to be grateful. Even just start with something simple, whatever it might be. Some people have a gratitude journal. I was reading online that somebody, a very influential, successful individual, had this acronym for how they start the day. TIME, T-I-M-E. And the T stands for thankfulness. And it's just this idea of just inputting into my consciousness, like as a practice, like before I start stressing about the day, before I go looking on my phone, before I let anxiety kick in, before I wonder, like, what I'm going to do for the day, or let things just start to pile into my consciousness, thankfulness, thankfulness, thankfulness. And then the I was insight. They have some sort of insight. They read something or gain some insight from somewhere. And then M is meditate and E is exercise. Andrea says she has a gratitude jar. We say Hari Bol every time we write something into it. Jeffrey Ackler wrote in chapter 13 that there's also this idea of the ego. Those who see with eyes of knowledge and difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage and material nature, attain to the supreme goal. Bhagavad Gita chapter 13, verse 35. Thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. Yes, there's so much of this idea of separating the idea of the soul from the body. There's that famous story I think I've told a couple times of Srila Prabhupada, who was talking with a industrialist who was talking about how successful he's made it, so that I had nothing and I made something of myself. And Srila Prabhupada said, what do you do? He said, I manufacture glass. I manufacture glass. He said, oh, can you manufacture sand? He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, how do you make your glass? He said, it comes from sand. He says, where do you get your sand? He said, from the beach. He said, oh, so you're a thief. What? Nobody ever talked to this man like this before. He's a very successful industrialist. He said, you're taking Krishna's sand and making your own product and selling it and keeping the money for yourself. So this idea of just thankfulness, of that actually I'm not manufacturing anything. So when we talk about forgetting Krishna, we can practice gratitude by as a form of gratitude is a form of remembrance. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Prahlad Maharaj says. The 9 processes of devotional service. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. Hearing, chanting, and remembering, Smaranam. And being grateful simply means to remember. Simply means to remember. Humility is simply an honest awareness of the reality of our situation in comparison to Krishna's presence and material nature and our position in it. Humility is not some self-deprecation process. It's just an honest self-awareness of our position in relationship to the ultimate reality. And gratitude is simply a remembrance of Krishna's presence in our life, evidenced by the fact that we're here. Whether we're listening live or tuning into recording, we have the Bhagavatam available to us. I mean, it's like, look, you just go online, you type Vedabase, boom, free resources, everything you could ever need right there. You just go into in a few minutes we're going to have Radha Muralidhar present for us. Any local temple or just online, you can have darshan of the deity. And the Sangha of devotees and association, whether you're in a Bhakti Center community group or a sage group or whatever it is, free Sangha is available. And so this remembrance of Krishna's presence in our life. And Srila Prabhupada exemplified this remembrance more than anybody. His morning walks are really beautiful examples of that. Srila Prabhupada in so many ways was just simply going around and remembering Krishna. Jeff Ackler said that gratitude is remembrance and humility is awareness of that gratitude. Very well put. So, we have another verse here that probably has a purport that we should get to. But this verse of Bhagavatam, during the rainy season, the roads, not being cleansed, become covered with grass and debris and were thus difficult to make out. These roads were like religious scriptures that Brahmins no longer study and that thus become corrupt and covered over with the passage of time. So things get forgotten. Things get covered over due to forgetfulness. Our own shine of the soul gets covered over by the clouds of false ego. And we should practice deep remembrance. And we should also stay very close. How do we keep that remembrance? Krishna Surya Sama Maya Hoya Andhakara. What's the verse? Krishna Surya Sama Yahan Krishna Tahan Krishna something. Krishna Surya Sama Maya Hoya Andhakara. Yahan Krishna Taha Nahi Mayara Adhikara. Krishna is compared to the sunshine and Maya is compared to the darkness. Wherever there is sunshine, there cannot be darkness. As soon as one takes the Krishna conscious, the darkness of illusion, the influence of the external energy will immediately vanquish. So Krishna is compared to the sun. Bhagavatam itself compares, this Bhagavat Purana is as brilliant as the sun. So keep the sunshine close. Keep the sunshine close to dispel darkness. Keep the sunshine close in the form of Krishna's holy name. Keep the sunshine close in the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Keep the sunshine close in the form of intentional conscious association with devotees. Keep the sunshine close in the form of the Archa Vigraha, whether it's a simple picture of Krishna in your home or the deity in the temple. Your home can become a temple. And keep the sunshine close by holy places of pilgrimage, the holy Dham. And the Dham is not a physical location, but it's a state of consciousness, that we can bring that with us. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's mentioned that to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that wherever you go, that is Vrindavan. So wherever we're holding these things close, that becomes Vrindavan. So Rupa Goswami gives us these prescriptions, Nam Dham, Bhagavatam, Deity, and Devotee, as a way to keep the sunshine close, so that we can remember Krishna, so that the roads back to Him don't become covered. The road back to Godhead, the road back to Krishna's grace, doesn't be covered by the grass and debris of false ego and cynicism and enmity and criticism. And that's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentioned that the two things to attain perfection are to always chant the name of Krishna and never criticize devotees. Because the holy name is the sunshine, and the criticism is like a cloud. It's like a covering of the heart that prevents us from experiencing that sunshine. So keep the heart open and keep the sunshine flowing. Beautiful verse, beautiful verse. Okay, we have one more verse and there's a purport here. Hare Krishna. We got 10 minutes left. Let's go through it real quick. 10:20:17. Loka bandhushu megashu vidyutas chalas sauhrida staryam na chakru kamina purusheshu gunish viva. Translation: though the clouds are the well-wishing friends of all living beings, the lightning, fickle in its affinities, move from one group of clouds to another, like lusty women, unfaithful even to virtuous men. Hare Krishna! Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see where this goes. In the Srimad Bhagavatam and throughout literatures, Srimad Bhagavatam, both men and women sometimes are not as a... What I think is important to take away from here is the consciousness of fickleness that is not exemplified by... I mean, naturally this statement could be very offensive and, ooh, like, why is that being said? I think when you look at through Srimad Bhagavatam, material consciousness is very much frowned upon, whether it's exemplified by men, women, or anyone. Whether it's exemplified by men, women, or anyone. And there are examples of men being described as fools, and there are examples of women being described as fools. And there are examples of men being described as exalted, amazing individuals. We have saints in our movement. And there are examples of women being glorified, Draupadi, Kunti Devi, and their compassion, etc. So the knee-jerk reaction here, I think, when I read this, is almost like, ugh. But I think it's also important that what's being described here isn't so much the gender as much as the consciousness which can take place in anyone. And so Srila Prabhupada hears, well, this verse isn't translated by Prabhupada. We're going to hear Srila Prabhupada comments in the Krishna book in a second. We don't have tons of time to unpack it, so we're going to read this, and we'll see where it goes. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada comments, during the rainy season, lightning appears in one group of clouds and then immediately in another group of clouds. This phenomenon is compared to a lusty woman who does not fix her mind on one man. A cloud is compared to a qualified person because it pours rain and gives sustenance to many people. A man who is unqualified similarly gives sustenance to many living creatures, such as family members or many workers in business. Unfortunately, his whole life can be disturbed by a wife who divorces him. When the husband is disturbed, the whole family is ruined, the children are dispersed, so the business is closed, and everything is affected. It is therefore recommended that a woman desiring to advance in Krishna consciousness peacefully live with a husband, and that the couple could not separate under any condition. The husband and wife could control sex indulgence and concentrate their minds on Krishna consciousness so their life may be successful. After all, in the material world, a man requires a woman and a woman requires a man. When they are combined, they should live peacefully in Krishna consciousness and should not be restless like the lightning flashing from one group of clouds to another. So the principle here is the idea of, Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, the nature of the mind, right? That the mind is very flickering. The mind can be the best friend or the worst of enemies. Let's see where there can be a verse here about the mind. Chapter 6, verse 26. Yato yato nischalati manas chanchalam astiram tatastato niyam yaitad atmanyeva vasam nayet. From wherever the mind wanders, due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. Manas chanchalam astiram. So these two words, astira means unsteady. Stira means fixed, stable. Like Yudhisthira Maharaj, fixed in battle. Yudhisthira. Yudha means battle. Stira means fixed. So astira means unfixed. And chanchala means flickering, constantly going from one place to the other. So the mind is like that. The nature of the mind is like that. And the goal in Krishna consciousness is to be able to absorb our mind in Krishna, in one place, as Krishna says multiple times in the Bhagavad Gita, Man manabhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskuru mam evaishasya yuktaivam atmana mat prayana. Translation: engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. So we can't be absorbed if the mind is under the control of our lower nature and fixed on desire outside of Krishna. So much of Krishna consciousness is learning how to absorb our mind intentionally in Krishna consciousness, which is a big task at hand. And again, it's a muscle that we flex, just like gratitude is a muscle. Steadiness and fixedness of consciousness is a muscle that wherever the mind wanders, due to its flickering and unsteady nature, we have to slowly bring it back under the control of the self. This verse here from Srimad Bhagavatam, from the Bhagavad Gita. Wherever the mind wanders, due to it's a practice. Okay, the mind's going to wander. Let me start to bring it back. Not just in my job, but anywhere. My mind starts to wander towards criticism of devotees. My mind starts thinking that the grass is greener on the other side. My mind starts thinking of whatever it might be. Let me bring it back and absorb myself in whatever way I possibly can. So this principle is being mentioned in this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam and in this purport. The idea of like the lightning going from one cloud to the other, like the mind jumping from one to another. And Srila Prabhupada is giving this example of someone in a relationship jumping ship from one to the other. And Srila Prabhupada would, the example goes both ways. One time Srila Prabhupada gave this statement about men who would be in multiple relationships without settling down and choosing a partner. And Prabhupada said, we don't want bachelor daddies. Meaning this sense of just like this idea of not being able to settle down in a relationship. At the same time, relationships are extraordinarily hard. Srila Prabhupada's marriage was not easy. And sometimes sometimes it gets really, really hard. Srila Prabhupada himself, in the later years of his life, we know Srila Prabhupada left his marriage and he took sannyas. He took sannyas because he recognized that it was no longer conducive for his spiritual life and his mission and what he was being called to do by Krishna. He took sannyas and he came to America and he delivered the world. And so what I really appreciated from Rasanath's class on Sunday, when he was talking about the sensitivity of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that sometimes we have these general guidelines in life, but it takes tremendous sensitivity to understand of how they get applied in our life. And so the general principle we have here, Srila Prabhupada mentioning here about marrying and not separating under any circumstance, about a woman settling down and finding a steady relationship, in other places a man settling down and finding a steady relationship. We commit to a guru, we commit to a practice, we commit to certain vows, and at the same time the application of that can be very tricky, and it requires great sensitivity and compassion to be able to apply it with maturity. And the ultimate prescription and prohibition by Rupa Goswami, as quoted in the Padma Purana, is to always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada would speak very strongly. This is something really important to understand of Srila Prabhupada. He would speak and he would write very strongly, because he would be very clear in the principle. And he would act and engage very compassionately in his dealings with other people. And so Srila Prabhupada would speak very strongly about sannyasis, for example. And there's a verse in Bhagavatam and a reference, Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, wherever, I think it's Bhagavatam, a reference, and Prabhupada would quote that for a sannyasi to give up their vows and to enter back again into material enjoyment by getting married or engaging in sexual activity after giving up a lifelong, after taking a lifelong vow of celibacy for a sannyasi, it's like eating one's own vomit. I've renounced this, I've given it up, and now I'm taking it back in. Very strong, heavy language, graphic. And then during Srila Prabhupada's own time, sannyasis that he initiated would fall down. Srila Prabhupada would extend enormous compassion to them. And he would invite them and ask how they're doing, ask how their wife is doing. There's one example where Srila Prabhupada gave one of his own rings to a fallen sannyasi for his wife. There are examples of devotees in Prabhupada's time who would steer away from the principles of Krishna consciousness, and devotees would shun them or gossip about them. And Srila Prabhupada put a stop to it and said, "You are preventing this person from ever coming back to our Sangha." So when we read Prabhupada's books, there's strong language sometimes. And it's important for us to zoom out and understand the principle being communicated and the context in which it's being communicated, and the sensitivity and the maturity with which we approach it, whether it's about relationships, about marriage, about chastity. So, okay, Hare Krishna. The conch is being blown. Thank you all so much for your kind audience. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhagavatam ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande.
Great class, Dayal Gauranga Prabhu. Dayal Gauranga Prabhu ki jai. You handled those heavy verses very nicely, Dayal Gauranga Prabhu, with maturity, compassion. Thank you very much. Adipusha Prabhu, will you facilitate darshan?
I'm trying.
Will you shake the phone?
I'll try not to shake the phone.
Jai.
Okay, dear devotees, please turn your cameras on. Krishna is going to take a look. He already
Flower,
sees you.
flower emojis.
Yeah, flower emojis. Let me see. You go to reactions and then choose flower. Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, very, very brief darshan. Very brief. Thank you very much again, Dayal. Gauranga Prabhu. Thanks everyone for participating in this class. Thank you for your smile, Jamuna Jaya. It doesn't fit in the Zoom screen, your smile. Amazing. Nice seeing everybody. Okay. Would anyone like to reflect?
Hare Krishna. I have to dip off, but thank you all so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. We'll take reflections for you, Dayal Gauranga Prabhu. Okay.
I just like to thank Venetia for that mic drop of an explanation she gave. That was so concise and spot on. When he said it, my mind was going, well, I did, and then she came right up with the words. like it was so awesome. So yay on you, Venetia. That was wonderful. And then the other thing that, one of the verses we talked about is that Krishna says it's covered, it's not lost. And I always find that very encouraging. It's just like the sun's not gone, it's just covered. It's always there. We just have to have the right consciousness and the right teachings to see beyond the cloud. And then just one more thing, I really appreciated like Jeffrey's take on gratitude, and I have themes of my year, and so I dubbed 2023 the year of what went right. So about 5 times a day, I stop and I think, okay, what went right? Because it's so easy to contract over what went wrong, and then you lose your gratitude. So I always like, okay, what went right in this last half hour, especially if it's a bad day. I just stop and go, okay, but what went right? So I've been finding that really helpful when he said about gratitude as a practice. That's sort of my practice. What went right? So very cool, everybody.
Thank you, Jamuna Jaya. Yeah, that's very hope giving. We're not gone. We're just covered sometimes, maybe. Bhim Prabhu.
Haribol. Yeah, I love his class, and I love how he handled the strong language Prabhupada used as a sadhu to cut, and then of course he heals. I think that example of giving the ring to a sannyas who looked back and got married, it was just lovely, just wonderful. That alone is enough to remember the compassion of Srila Prabhupada. I would very quickly like to read a poem that somebody had written it, and I take this creative writing class it's sort of an interfaith writing class, and a lot of it's poetry, and I'll just get right to it. And I thought it was very appropriate. I just read it this morning, and Dayal Gauranga was talking about gratitude, and the opposite of gratitude, of course, is taking for granted all that Krishna has given us. So let me just quickly read this poem. This morning, I saw a bird on a branch. I sat perfectly still and silent. He was so very near to me. I could see the light inside his dark eyes. And he had a sesame seed he had taken that I had thrown. And as he worked it open with his little beak and his little bird feet, I glanced over the sheen of his wonderful red feathers. And in the sheen of his little dark eyes, I saw the glint of life. I saw how he was born into those feathers, and born into flight, and born to eat the seeds of the flowers. And in this moment, I saw God more clearly than in 1,000 pages of scripture. I don't know anything about God dancing with young spiritual maidens under the full moon, but I saw God dancing in the vivid red feathers of that cardinal, and I saw him dancing in the pure white, bright snow that red cardinal was standing upon. And I felt God in the miracle of my eyes to be able to perceive this moment, simple as it was. Hold on, I just lost it. In that moment, simple as it was, that God is life, and I didn't see him because I took it all for granted. I took my very existence for granted, as if I had anything to do with it. This just being. Hold on, I lost it. This just being. We take every moment of this miracle of life for granted, and we need religion and yoga and philosophy and work to remind ourselves that perhaps something else might just be going on behind what is right before our eyes in every God-given moment. So that when I read that, I was very much moved to be grateful. So I just thought I hope that came off well as a shared poem. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Nice. Bhima Prabhu. Bhima, the Kaviraj of this class. Bhima, the poet. Thank you. Thank you for reading that. Jamuna Jaya says, wow. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so let's wrap it up. Let's go out into the world and see Krishna in the snow, in the red cardinal, in the pile of garbage, on the sidewalk, everywhere is Krishna. Or lack of Krishna. If we see that, that's also good. Hey Mangi, Hare Krishna, nice seeing you. Andrea, Isabel, Jamuna Jaya, Venetia, Poppy. Poppy, see, how do you pronounce your name?
Poppy.
Poppy. Poppy.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Poppy. Bruce, Prabhu, Rich Bhakti, Suzanne, Amrita Kishori, Didi, Leslie, Sharmila, Pink Yogi. I know Pink Yogi of Harlem's name. I can give out one letter today. The first letter of Pink Yogi of Harlem's name is N, as in Nancy. Okay. Suspense. Dana Keli Prabhu, Dana Krishna Radharani. Love you all. Have a wonderful day. And Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.